What's new in filmmaking technology this week? News, reviews, education, insights, opinions, and ideas from the CineD newsroom with Mino Leitner and Johnny Bahiri. This is Focus Check, the weekly CineTech podcast.
Welcome to episode 6 of Focus Check. Morning, Johnny.
Hi, Nino. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. And today we have a special guest, actually, somebody for whom it's very late. Welcome to Markus Förderer in LA. How are you?
Hello, Markus.
Hi, Johnny. Hi, Nino. Good to see you guys.
It's nice to have you on the show. Actually, today we invited you to join because we want to do a little bit of a lens nerd episode, especially anamorphic lenses. For people who haven't heard of you, that's a big mistake, but there might be some who haven't heard of you. You're the DP of Red Notice, Independence Day Resurgence, and most lately, Constellation, a new TV series on Apple TV Plus, which actually I think is their most popular show right now. So congratulations on that. I watched the first 2 episodes that you were the DP on last night, and it's just beautiful.
Thanks so much. Yeah, that was a fun show. So if you have Apple, check it out. And it shot in anamorphic lenses. Lots to talk about lenses if you want to dive into this.
Great. So before diving into the lenses, let's hear a little bit about you. You are originally from Germany?
I'm from Germany, yes. I grew up in the south, in the Black Forest region. I went to film school in Munich. And during that time, I was fortunate that I met an amazing director, Tim Fehlbaum. He's a Swiss director. And we shot our first feature film. It's called Hell. It's like a post-apocalyptic sci-fi film. And we decided to overexpose. The sun is very bright, so we decided to overexpose by like 5 stops. That would have been fun for your lab tests because we really wanted to clip the digital sensor and make it a storytelling point. And it was visually quite unique, and that I was fortunate, got a couple of cinematography awards, and that got me some attention. So I ended up shooting my first film in the US, and I worked with Roland Emmerich on a couple of projects, and then eventually I moved to the States, and now I'm like shooting mainly features, but Constellation was I shot the first episodes for that TV show, which also it felt like doing a feature film. It was a really great experience.
How is it to be a DP in LA? Do you like it? I mean, of course you will say, I guess yes, but the overall, is it a constant stress? Maybe Hollywood, Bollywood? What is your opinion?
Hollywood, yeah. I mean, people always, like, from my family back home, they think, oh my God, you live in Hollywood, like literally. And but it is, I think, like everywhere, there's many great, talented DPs here doing fantastic work. It's always like motivating. You're meeting friends. Like I'm a member of the ASC, and the ASC Clubhouse is very close. It's a great opportunity to meet colleagues and chat about ideas and just be inspired. But the interesting fact is that we rarely work in LA. Like this is a great point to meet people, and the weather is fantastic, and all the amazing companies are here. So it's great to check out new gear and talk about new technologies. But most of the big projects go to different parts of the world. There's just not the capacity here.
Markus,
Constellation, Constellation we shot actually was based in Berlin, and we filmed in Morocco, northern Finland, and different parts in Germany.
Yeah, I found it funny that in the first episodes you see the family living, I think it is in Cologne, right? So I felt like, were you able to kind of go home for the shoot, or?
Yeah. That was fun. My wife's actually from Kazakhstan, so when I heard about the project that we're going to film in Germany and it's set in Kazakhstan, part of the story. So this is sounds like a really interesting project. It's not just shot on a soundstage. We really went to different places.
I mean, it's really shot beautifully. I think you were quite daring with a lot of the anamorphic lens choices. I see a lot of, sometimes in some shots, very vignetting, but it's really focusing the audience to the center of the screen, of course. And do you feel like when I only, not so recently, kind of recently, I started shooting anamorphic also. Johnny has a lot more experience with anamorphic lenses, but I almost feel like cheating when I shoot anamorphics, because it's like cheating your way into the cinema look. You know what I mean? It's like something that looks really boring in a way. You put an anamorphic lens on it, and it's kind of like a secret sauce for people that are used on shooting spherical lenses, and you put an anamorphic lens on it and everything looks amazing. That's just interesting.
It is interesting, but there's some DPs or filmmakers, they hate it too, right? Like there's some people who can't stand it, or they don't like distortion, and you really have to embrace, right, the characteristics, like the distortion or the way the focus breathing works. But like I love it too. I truly, there's two different camps of filmmakers. Some people want to work with lenses and cameras that represent the way their eye sees, but I think an anamorphic lens, I would argue, is very different from the way we see, and that's what's actually pleasing. I think you feel like you're watching a movie, that there's a story being told. This is like a heightened cinematic world. I think that's what puts the viewer at ease, and maybe you let go and enjoy watching a film, and you see that every shot something feels unusual. And that's, I think, even me, I find still interesting, even if I shoot anamorphic a lot, but that's why it's also so important I like to mix up lenses from project to project. I never shoot twice back to back on the same glass, because I visually get almost fatigued by, on a long project when you shoot like for 4 or 5 months sometimes. Every day you see these lenses. In the beginning in prep, you were really excited. Wow, look at those flares, or look at this, how it renders skin tones and the bokeh. But after seeing this every day, you feel like, oh my God, I'm ready for something fresh. And that's why I think we live in such exciting times. Like a couple of years back, anamorphic was such a high-end, small market. There were like a handful of those, obviously Panavision lenses. There was Hawk had some lenses. Then later there came Cook and some other companies. But now I feel like every other month there's a new anamorphic lens being announced, and at very different price points, right? Different form factors, smaller, lighter. Every flare color you wish for, there's an option for.
Of course, we want to touch the camera aspect in a second, but since you're already mentioning so many lenses, are you also daring, at least in terms of experimenting with the budget-friendly lenses, or there is a certain level that you say, no, thank you?
It doesn't matter to me how expensive it is. Like if you really, let's say, blind test equipment, right? The same goes also for cameras. The price point doesn't necessarily show, like expensive lens doesn't, or like a lens that costs $50,000 doesn't look 10 times better than one that costs $5,000, right? It's sometimes surprising, especially if you like vintage lenses and the look. Like I'm always excited, like hunting on eBay for some old, like maybe stills lenses, and see, oh wow, there's still something new to discover. And there's some stills lenses you can buy for $20, $30 that I would prefer to any high-end cinema lens, like from its look, right? And maybe not the mechanics and the mechanical reliability. But then the same goes for anamorphic. Is, of course, it's way more difficult, I think, from a lens design standpoint, and to make it, I don't know, a low-cost lens. Maybe you have to cut corners in the quality of the glass and maybe the tolerances. But I find, especially sometimes there's also specific applications, like on, let's say, Constellation, for example. We used Panavision T-series as our primary lenses, but we knew we had like drones. We used FPV drones and smaller gimbals. We had a Ronin 4D, and I knew we need lighter solutions. So I'm always looking for smaller, lighter anamorphics that pair nicely with others. So that's why it's so important to do tests and shoot your own tests and see what matches, and doesn't need to necessarily be all from the same manufacturer.
That's interesting. You used the Ronin 4D on that show. I was just curious which shots you like where.
Where they all blended. Like this is something I think I'm very excited about that camera when it came out. Right, a lot of people thought like, oh, what is this? And frankly, I wouldn't use it as a main camera for something like this. It works for our context. It worked great because we had our main cameras were V Raptors, and we could color like we created with our colorist and DAT. We created a very precise show LUT and one also to match the Ronin 4D to the red. But still, in DI, it takes time to get there. But if you have a visual reference, I think then it's doable to match them, and you get some unique. Mainly, the reason was zero gravity. Like for some in very tight spaces, sometimes like we had this amazing set, like a replica. Our production designer built an 1:1 scale replica of the ISS segments, but some parts are really tiny, narrow, or little airlocks to get through. So for some specific cases, I used it to be where otherwise we would have to pull a wall and set up a big crane, and even on a big project like this, you never have enough time. So sometimes you want to grab this last minute shot, and I feel like with that tool, it's an all-in-one system, right? You have your wireless video, your gimbal, the camera, there's ND filters. You can just grab it and get a shot quickly. So that's sometimes it was like a magic tool, but it's for specific moments, specific shots, a couple of shots here and there.
The zero gravity shots really looked very convincing. I thought about this yesterday because this is sometimes something where you watch sci-fi and I feel like, sometimes it's like not very convincing, but this looked real. Which anamorphics did you end up using on the Ronin 4D then? I mean, it's very limiting.
Yeah, we could actually, I tested what was out there. We didn't find anything at that point in time. Now there's some other options out like that when we started prepping. So we ended up using the Lights M8s, like spherical primes, and some of the original DJI lenses, which have the focus built in. But I did some detuning, like to make sure, because they're very sharp and very neutral, and because this was hard to cut. So in prep, we messed a bit with those lenses, and that's again, they're amazing. They're so small, so light, like really carbon fiber housing, if I remember correctly. And because they're so sharp, you can detune it in a way. And I always feel like it's not that expensive if you break it compared to one of our big lenses. So we ended up doing spherical for those. But today, like it's the weight capacity, that's the big issue, right? With a gimbal system like this. Now there's smaller anamorphics. I would test again and see if it's worth doing. But sometimes even like for drones, sometimes we went spherical too, just to, I think at a certain distance, maybe the anamorphic characteristics are not that obvious. Maybe it's a distortion, but that you can manipulate in post. So they had a flexibility. Sometimes we had also a Ronin, a DJI Inspire 3, which I believe was the first. Like we had a very early one, which was actually amazing in freezing temperatures. We had the best diffusion filter you can imagine, like at minus 30 degrees Celsius, we flew that drone, and we had, I was always concerned that the lens is so sharp because it's a spherical lens, but we literally got like frost, little ice crystals forming on the lens while flying in Finland. And it was the most amazing diffusion I've ever seen. Like it just took the edge off.
Markus, out of curiosity, when you've been working with the Ronin, did you use autofocus or manual focus? I'm asking because it's encouraging to hear that we are facing similar things. You said I grabbed the Ronin, I had very little time, I had to do the shot now. It sounds like it doesn't matter the level and how much capacity and how much money is involved in the production. We're all facing similar issues. Yeah. So did you use autofocus? Nobody's listening. Tell me the truth.
Yeah, no. I know that's a very hot topic for focus pullers. Obviously, everybody wants to control. For some shots, we used autofocus, but most of the time I gave my focus puller the monitor with the remote, so he could override it or control it. But there were a couple of instances where I literally grabbed the camera and went in there, and it's amazing, and I'm totally embracing it. Like there's other autofocus systems out there for not for the Ronin but for any lens, and I'm super excited about it. Because it's what's always a bit frustrating for me, especially if you work on bigger projects in the US, the traditional setup with ASCs putting a couple of boxes here and there, like you have big focus motor and a focus controller, MDR, and some people like to use a light ranger. There's so many boxes attached, where I feel like some of the newer companies are very innovative, right? With some motors that can do autofocus. There's this with PD movie, right, which has a built-in LiDAR in a tiny, unbelievable. Again, it's nothing you want to use on a big film set on a crane or with interference. That's always the issue with those systems. They might work in a small scale, but once you go on a soundstage you have hundreds of lights, wireless video, wireless focus, sometimes maybe 67 people crew, everybody has their phones in their pocket. There's so much signal interference, that you really need a reliable, strong system. So some of these, I think, lower cost systems struggle. But I feel like the gap is quite big between how innovative some of the new companies are, or let's say that some cameras have built-in autofocus and some lenses allow autofocus, right? Or at least internal motors. It doesn't need to be autofocus, the internal motors, and that's that bummer with anamorphics. There is no version yet, because anamorphic lenses usually are bigger, heavier, and made for the high-end market, right? Where autofocus is not that much requested. So I wish there was a solution where something would be coming which would give you lens data and maybe at least internal motors that can streamline your camera package.
Do you feel like you mentioned that your focus puller who used the Ronin 4D would sometimes use the autofocus but then be able to override it with the remote? There are those functions that the Ronin 4D has, and also some newer Sony small cameras actually have that, which is like an assisted autofocus mode. So it is actually doing face tracking or whatever, but as you said, you can always override it and then go into manual, and I think it's something that is really gaining traction now, because of pure autofocus is of course problematic, because sometimes it's just very hard to pull focus while it's tracking a face, and then you want to pull focus to an object, and then you have to set up the speed on how it's changing. That's very hard to do. But those assisted systems, can you see those, also being more used in higher end productions in the future?
I think so. It's a process, and I feel like it's a bit slow. Because so many assistants are used to working with certain gear from certain manufacturers, and there's certain standards set on what people like to work with. I think especially in the US, there's different markets, right? In Europe, a lot of people use the Airy handset, which has some amazing features, and but I think totally for me the job of focus puller is not necessarily to just keep the focus on the eyes. It's a creative storytelling opportunity. You want to rec to an object in the foreground, or the timing when and how fast. But I think if you can take away some of the like it's super stressful. I worked as a focus puller before I became a cinematographer for a little bit. I was not that great, but I highly.
So you were not good enough, and you were like, I'm gonna become a DP.
and it's really just the level of stress, and there's so much responsibility on your shoulders. If you can't nail the shot, you have to repeat it over and over again, right? You can ruin a perfect, amazing performance. So that if you can take away some of this stress and sort of the focus puller can focus way more on the timing when they think you go from this person to that person, or just be creative. I think that's a great tendency I see coming.
Markus, before we dive into the art of working with anamorphic lenses, please let us know or share with us, how do you choose the camera for a specific project? Is it because of a brand name, or it's because of the specifications, or it's just your personal preferences? How do you choose a camera?
It's usually, in fact, like talking about lenses, for me, the lens is the most important factor. So first, when I start reading a script for a new project and you try to imagine how this could look like, I always think of what lens is the right lens for that story, and I do lens tests, and then I see which sensor pairs well with that lens. Like, for example, on Red Notice, we found these ultra Panatars from Panavision, 70 millimeter, 1.25 squeeze, large format lenses, some really old lenses, and we found at that point the Red Monstro was the perfect fit, because we need a wide sensor. There's no benefit of a tall sensor, because we wanted 2:3:9 aspect ratio for delivery. So the wide sensor was perfect. There would have been no benefit of, I feel like, going with bigger cameras. That whatever. So the sensor geometry, so to say, is very important, and of course then the image quality of the sensor. But luckily, in the last years, right, as we've all seen, the most manufacturers in the high-end market reached a level that it's, if you know a little bit how to expose, they are almost indistinguishable. And depending on what kind of creative grading you're using or show LUT. So that's always the lens is determining. And if you go anamorphic, right, there's now so many squeeze factors today, 1.3, 1.5, 1.8, 2 times, of course, very prominent. So on Constellation, for example, we went with the Red V Raptor. Especially what I like about the Red cameras, you still get in anamorphic, you still get a high resolution, because some of the sensors in anamorphic mode, I don't know, the anamorphic used to be the high quality format, right? In the film days, that's why it's 4 per film. You got very fine grain because the negative you're using is so big. And in the digital age, some people using anamorphic lenses, but you're basically cropping into your sensor using just a small slice of it, and then the lens might be a bit soft on top of it, so it's not necessarily high quality. But for this show, we really wanted to go for a rich negative, a high resolution look. In a way, I was not shy to, I don't think it's overly sharp, but the anamorphics still take a bit of the edge off. And then again, the flexibility on the sensor that you can, because the Raptor has such high resolution, you can change from what they call 8K mode to 7K mode, or even lower resolutions, and get different field of view. Sometimes, again, speaking about time pressure, you might be on a 40 and you want to go a bit tighter, and you're in the middle of a intense performance and you don't want to let the actor stop the flow by changing a lens. You can quickly change a setting on a camera, and you crop in, so to say, get a slightly tighter look, and it's still plenty of resolution, and nobody will see any loss, and just keep the flow going. I think was the main reason.
So actually, in this specific Constellation, you use 16:9, a portion of the sensor. That's what you're saying, with 1.5 anamorphics?
6:5 is the native sensor crop, basically for anamorphic. and that de-squeezed by 2 gives you a 239 or a 240. But then you can crop into, like, there's a 7K mode. Like, it's an 8K sensor. They call it 8K anamorphic. They're talking about the vertical height. So it's like 5.1K horizontal by 4K vertical, but you can crop in, and it's like a 3K. I don't know the exact number. It's slightly tighter. That's and then also right, there's an ecosystem. There's like Komodos, which have the same kind of image size and file format. Especially in the ISS, we knew we had to place like security cameras. With astronauts in the real ISS, they always film themselves like doing experiments or documenting experiments. They don't have official security cameras filming or check out this corridor, but they have cameras for observing experiments. And we said, because I knew from years ago, like NASA has all kinds of different cameras up there, but they really shot up like Red Dragon 6K cameras for what they used for some documentaries and documenting. So I thought it's not too far stretched. And there's always, I think with the space program, it always takes time, from what I learned, from certifying a camera, training the astronauts until they shoot it up there and then they have it. They can't have the latest camera technology up there. But I thought it's not too far off. In a couple of years, they will for sure use Komodos because they're small and light and great for space travel, I think. And so I thought, let's put Komodos, we can keep them in the shot. We don't have to hide them as film cameras. We mounted them like on magic arms. That's what astronauts really do. They use film grip equipment. And we had like an astronaut consultant, Scott Kelly, who was like amazing. And I asked him like, hey, how would you mount this? We have this photo arm. Like a magic arm, sure. And we could place them all over and then cut to this footage and use it, and it cut seamlessly with our A and B cameras.
So did an editor ever alert you like, oh, you had a camera in shot?
No. That's amazing. There's so much photo gear out there. It's quite fun. They Velcro everything. They have like their photo wall for real, where they Velcro all their stills lenses, zoom lenses, their camera bodies. Fun fact, they used a lot of Nikon cameras. They Velcroed there. And we had our Komodos next to it.
I guess we're around, I think we're the same age. So I guess when you started, or slightly after the Red 1 came out, right? That was like 2008. So I'm sure you followed that whole journey of Red cameras, where they started and where they've come over the years as well. What's your opinion on like when did you first use them on a big project? And because I know in the beginning the Red 1 was a real revolution, but it wasn't always the most reliable piece of kit, I would say.
I think that was exciting times though, right? When it came out, with all people, not many people had got their hands on it. There was a lot of talks online, and is this thing real, and what can it do? And I remember seeing it. I just went to film school, and I think we had it was like a welcome party for the new students. And there was, in a corner in the film school, there was a camera on a tripod. And I was like, I thought it interesting. Is this a real camera? Why would it sit here on a tripod while this party's going on? And nobody paid attention and looked at it. And I went up to it and I said, oh my God, it's a Red 1. And it was just basically recently announced that how come this is already in Germany and sitting there and nobody's paying attention. This is like, right at that time, like 4K RAW, that was unheard of. And so I checked out this camera. Over the course of the years, I shot on many different cameras, Alexas and all kinds of cameras. But my first feature film, this movie Hell, we tried to get, but at that time there was only prototypes for the Alexa, but I knew they exist, and we tried to get them for our film, but we couldn't get them. Our producer, like executive producer Roland Emmerich, we told him about it. There's this amazing new camera. We want to use it. Can you help us getting maybe these prototypes? And he ended up using them himself for his film Anonymous, which was the first feature ever shot on an Alexa. So then the only option we had was the Red One, which was perfect for us because at that time the Alexa couldn't record internally. If you remember in the beginning, they could only record to external HD cam SR recorders, like before they added the internal recording. So the Red One recording in, when was this, 2000? I shot my first feature in 2009, I believe. We recorded on internal compact flash cards, short recording times, but it's still unbelievable. And recently I found a hard drive with some raw stills. I always pull like raw stills for quality control, so to say. And I opened them up in like Red CineX, and it's unbelievable how good this still looks today, because it's just 4K or even 4.5K in a raw format and like super highly compressed, right? The compression they're using, but the result looks amazing. So that's fascinating.
Very nice. So we established what cameras you like to work with. By the way, do you sometimes use mirrorless cameras from other brands, or mirrorless is kind of out of the league?
No, it's I was tested for. We use sometimes for specific cases. Blackmagic cameras, I think, are very interesting because they also can record RAW. I would consider this. It's not a true mirrorless, right? It's really designed for the Blackmagic Pocket series. They look like a mirrorless camera in a way, but maybe because you're not meant to shoot stills, people don't think of them as mirrorless cameras, but technically it is. Sometimes, I use mirrorless cameras for location scouts, and sometimes when I see something, I shoot a quick plate or a still plate, which we might end up using then for the film. But usually with the compression, and I'm always surprised when I see, maybe on a film festival, I see some independent film that was shot on some mirrorless camera, and you think like, wow, this looks fantastic, right? I think I should use it, embrace it more. But every time I test it next to whatever system we consider our A camera, there's still, even if the specs are amazing, there's full frame sensors and high bit rates, 10-bit and whatnot. That still the dynamic range and the color reproduction there's quite a big gap. There's a reason why there is some high-end cinema cameras. But that doesn't mean you cannot shoot an amazing looking film on it. I think
the picture aesthetic is still different.
But talking about mirrorless and you mentioned Nikon, we mentioned Red. So let's mention the elephant in the room. What do you make of the recent acquisition announcement of Red by Nikon? Yeah,
I have to say, we will see what happens. I think I'm quite excited about the potential. Like when you look back, like let's say when Red started, right, they were really disrupting the industry. There was nothing out there like this. And then it's hard to imagine it now. I think it's Red around for 20 years already. No, not quite, yet. Right?
It's since 2008, 15,
yeah. That they and all the other, like Sony, Arri, they all refining their cameras and they're getting better bit by bit. But I feel like there is, like, speaking of innovation, like autofocus and systems like this, I feel like we reached some sort of plateau of very good sensors and maybe cameras getting a bit smaller, but that's it. And then you look at traditional or like prosumer cameras, or like cameras that are not designed for the high-end market. They sometimes have very innovative features in a very small form factor, right? Because they're made for a mass market. That's as far as I understand how that goes with technology. If you manufacture something in a large number, you can afford to use extreme microelectronics and smaller boards. That's a process that would be too expensive if you only sell a couple of thousand cameras. So I'm hoping, but we'll see. Maybe, as far as I understand, Red is going to be its own company doing what they're doing, right? It's like a flagship high-end cinema company for Nikon. Just the ownership changed, and I don't know how they're going to exchange technology, but I'm hoping in a long run that this will inspire the engineers to like look at the best from both worlds and make smaller, lighter cameras, maybe with smart lenses. Like this might still all take time, but I think there's a lot of potential.
Yeah, we discussed this in another episode. It's a very interesting cohesion that's happening, and it's of course extremely different company cultures. So it's going to be interesting how they put them together, and also the complete different parts of the market. I mean, Nikon never had a really good foot in the cinema market, and Red is really only in the cinema market. So it's going to be interesting how that will converge. Yeah, but like in the end, of course, there's a little bit of sorrow here also, because we have what used to be the Rebel being sold to the establishment in a way, right? So let's hope that that they will keep their innovation going as well. But we know the market is difficult right now. I guess we can touch on this too, like how you feel everything is going, but the strikes heavily affected, of course, work, especially in the US and the UK, and of course, companies are also suffering from this. What's your take on this? I mean, it's been a difficult time, no?
Yeah, it has been difficult, and still such a slow start. After the strike last year, maybe people were anticipating that maybe there's a little boom again, like what happened after COVID when the industry shut down. But it's very slow because there's again negotiations going on right now with the ASC and other unions in the US. So it's still considered like a strike year. And I think from what I'm seeing, just studios are careful which projects to greenlight. And I read we all see this with manufacturers. It's such a big industry depending. It's not just people who are working directly on a film set. There's so many industries involved in making film gear and accessories and software and everything. And so, and then again, right, and then with AI looming around and creating some uncertainty, some people thinking, oh my God, we're all going to be replaced, where there's no more need for physical cameras and lenses. And
what is your take? What is your take on AI, Markus?
On AI?
Yeah.
I think it's a fascinating technology, or let's call it machine learning, right? AI always sounds like the magic box, but that's what these things do. They look at massive data and they learn from it, right? In a way, that's why AI, our brain works like this too, right? We look at, maybe when we grow up, we look at our parents, we look at the world, we see how other people solve problems and we learn from it. But I find it fascinating every time there's this, right? Every couple of weeks, there's some viral video coming out of some, oh my God, I have not seen this amazing thing. But it's interesting, but it's never, I feel like, there's a soul missing, right? You feel, the danger is obviously at some point when it's not labeled and you don't know anymore and you don't notice it was mixed in. But I think we're still, even if some people are super optimistic, we're still far away from creating, that's what people think, which would really disrupt many people's jobs and livelihoods, right? If you really prompt in, create a scene, make a movie basically with just prompting in this landscape, in this style. I think how I see it, it is when they say AI makes up stuff, right? You cannot precisely control how that image will look like. You can say, make it overcast lighting and this and that, but you can, the way we work on a film set, when we very precisely with a director and production designer say, we want this to look like that, and then we choose our cameras and lenses and lighting and framing, and we can precisely create. I think that's what the art form is for. We really create something precisely the way we want it. I don't see how that's happening with machine learning, because they, how to say, AI dreaming, and how you cannot replicate twice the same thing, because there's so much randomness happening, and it might look great and impressive at first glance because it learned from all these masters, right? It's oh wow, this looks like a professional like in stills or like an amazing analog photo and has depth of field and everything. It looks impressive, but is it what you wanted or an artist wanted, right? That's what I feel. That's why I don't feel threatened by it. Like,
I think there might also be a fatigue setting in at some point, because we all know those trends. I mean, of course, that's different, but still, we had a trend for sliders, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, then we had the drone shots, and now all of that became overused. And I feel like the more I see those AI images, even though they constantly evolve and constantly get better and more convincing, but once you've seen a lot of them, you kind of train your eye and you realize, oh, actually, that was artificially generated. And of course, as you said, like very often people might not know. That's the problem, right? If they don't tell you. And I already see them popping up in advertising, and you see, and they're not labeled very often. And you're like, I'm sure this was generated as a still with Midjourney because I've been using Midjourney. But you still train your eye and you realize, okay, actually, maybe as a fatigue will be setting in at some point where it will look like like something fake. Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's all about money, and I'm saying this with pain. Yeah, so maybe in the high end, like Markus is saying, when you need those emotions and framing and precise, look at things precisely. Maybe it will take more time, if at all. But imagine, let's say advertising. Yeah. Just a 30 seconds, 10 seconds commercial, 15 seconds. You know how much it costs now, and how much effort is being put, and at the end the client maybe doesn't want to pay the money. And maybe for that type of job, AI will be exactly what they are looking for. And we have the term good enough, and that's what happened with mirrorless cameras at the beginning. They were just good enough for so many other things, and that's why they succeed. And it can be that AI will simply be good enough for some of the things that are already produced in the market right now, much cheaper, and those will probably suffer that market, for example.
Yeah, but like Markus said, I think as soon as you move into shots where you need the same characters, the same objects repeating itself, that's right now very difficult. That's one thing, and the other thing we talked about last time, which is of course reality, like news, documentaries, sports. Yeah. That's going to be hard to replace. I mean, not very interesting to watch fake sports generated with a computer.
Markus, but I'm going back to our main topic. I see that you are extremely knowledgeable when it comes to the technical side, which is, I think for DP, it's a gift. Because I remember from like in the old days, many DPs were really concentrating on their, let's call artistic storytelling side, not really understanding much about the technical aspects. That's why the assistant would do a lot of stuff, or whoever. There would be other people that are more technically minded here. But I see that you have both minds. Where is this passion for the technical aspect grew up? I mean, that's from the beginning or from school, or?
I think it's so important, right? I think it's a craft, like cinematography is a craft. It's like arts and science, right? Like you cannot just be an artist and dream of this image, and then you want to use Sora or something. It's like, create me this rainy, foggy, shallow depth of field image, right? You have to understand the tools you want to use, and I think one thing is really to know, first of all, to know what's out there, right? For you to be able to choose what's the right tool for this project, for this story, for this shot. You have to know what's out there. And I think it just, out of curiosity, I'm just reading and see something new, and that's inspiring. And I'm always inspired when especially when a manufacturer shows you something new and they tell you, this is how it's meant to be used. That's what gets me excited to think like, okay, how can we use it in a different way, right? Like, that's coming back to red cameras again. Like early on, that's what fascinated me. Like some manufacturers, they design a camera system. You're going to use it in this sensor mode like that. It's meant to be shot with Super 35 lenses. And like Red made a sensor that was not follow any standard. It was bigger. And suddenly you could show parts of a lens that are not meant to be seen, right, by the lens manufacturer, or like work with vignetting. And I'm always thinking like, how can you use something in a fresh way And that's just curiosity. And that's how I obviously know your amazing platform, because this is a never-ending story with constantly new gear coming out. And I think that's why I just think like you have to know and understand what you're using to be able to use it, or also to decide not to use something. It's so important not to follow trends and think, oh yeah, now it's hip to shoot full frame, large format, right? Everybody, like now every big film you see coming out has the IMAX label. They all shot on IMAX cameras, being it like very few do IMAX film, but there's IMAX certified cameras and whatever. Like, do you need that? And if you really understand what's behind it, so you can do an informed decision, what's the right tool for your project?
Nino, shall we talk a little bit about flares and streaks?
Of course. I mean, Markus, you mentioned, that difficult times for a lot of people in LA, but you're already diversifying yourself. You kind of started a new platform, and you started cineflares.com, which we reported about before. We did an interview with you. We're putting the link in the show notes for everybody who's interested in knowing more about Cineflares in detail. Can watch that interview. But that was already, last year. Since then, the project has evolved. But maybe for people who haven't heard of Cineflares, you can explain a little bit what it is.
Yeah, so I have a big fascination with lenses, and this actually started when I graduated from film school. I had to do a technical project to get my degree, and with a couple of friends together, I just came from I've wrapped this film, Hell, this post-apocalyptic film, where I experimented a lot with lens flares and lenses. And I thought, what are we going to do? And I thought, let's do something about lens flares. And then I did some research. How do people usually test lenses? And you always see a camera assistant in a test room in front of a test chart waving a flashlight to get a quick sense, right, for how the lens reacts. And that might be good for that short moment, but lenses, we know there's so many out there, and their characteristics are so different that the only way to really choose, to make an informed decision which one you like better than another one, is you have to compare something side by side. And with flares, that's every angle degree of a flashlight makes a whole different, it's a whole different appearance. So we came up that we have to shoot with motion control in a deep light environment. And so over the years, I created this library of hundreds of lenses. They all shot at different T-stops from wide open, and then you can virtually stop down, basically. And we built I'm not a programmer, but I have some amazing programmers that are helping me. Actually, since COVID was the time when I had a lot of time, and I thought I have to rethink this project. And I had always a version that would only run on my computer. I could not show it online. And then I started reshooting everything in large format and 8K and 4K and whatnot. And now every opportunity I see a new lens, I try to put it on that platform. And then I showed it to other filmmakers, directors sometimes in prep, or other cinematographers at the ASC. And they always say oh my God, you have to publish this somehow, right? This is so much time went into this. And that's when last year we put up the beta version that people can play with it. And soon for NAB, we'll have the official, there's going to be a pro version, because there's so much time and effort that goes into it. So we're always there's a smaller version where people can play with it. But because it's a never-ending story with new lenses coming out constantly, we try to keep shooting, and it's very time-intense with motion control and manually to put them up there. It's very precise. I double-check everything myself, that it's because you cannot make any mistakes, otherwise it's off, or the labeling wouldn't be correct. So there's going to be a pro version. If people want to support the project, they can sign up and get access to the big library. If you want, I can show a quick thing how that looks like.
Jewel, please. I mean, that's for our watchers on YouTube. If you're listening to the audio podcast, you might not see anything. but we will try to explain what you do.
Exactly, like in the old days of sport, when you used to talk about football or soccer, and like, he's running from left to right, and it's a goal.
He's clicking the button.
He's clicking. Yes, so this is basically a side-by-side player. There's the same amount of lenses on the left side and on the right side, and you can select, let's say, speaking of anamorphic, you can, let's say, an Atlas Mercury, which is a more modern, large format anamorphic, and you want to compare it to, let's say, some old vintage Kawa anamorphic. And then you can select your focal length, 42, t-stop 2.8, 40 here. And when you hit play, you always see the light moving 180 degrees from left to right. And this is purely focusing on the flare characteristic. Like you can, with your arrow keys, you can go back and forth. And the idea, how I see it, I always feel like in a test like this, you cannot test generically for every scenario. So that's why we're focusing on the flare, because it immediately shows you, it's like a fingerprint, like the DNA. When you purely shine light into a lens, I feel like the lens reveals its character. And how I use it is basically you compare something and you say, I really like this lens, you can save it. Or you might want to compare the same lens at a different stop. Sometimes people say, I don't like this lens, but maybe it's just at that stop. Let's say there's some lenses, like there's a black wing, they react very differently at a different stop. Like this is the 27 wide open, and then I stop it down to 2.8. And so the image always exposure is compensated by shutter, so there's no filter or anything. So you see that's the same lens, but it looks very different. Color is washed out through this kind of unique things. I say this might be a bit crazy, but I like it at this stop. So there's like a feature you can save it, and then you have your selects.
So in the past, when you were testing, or when somebody was testing anamorphic lenses, they would essentially have a very, very small selection, right? Even on high budgets, I'm sure, right? You would probably have something like 3-4 different lens sets that you would have in mind, or know kind of how they looked, and then you would try to get them from rental houses because some of them are quite rare. And then you compare them and you would just, go with one because that's the ones you tested. But now having this amazing library, you can just literally look at least like how the flare characteristics of all of those lenses are, and then try to get your hands on lenses that you might not even have heard of before.
But are you also testing low-end anamorphic lenses there? Like budget-friendly lenses?
So initially we started focusing on like the big legacy lenses, and now I have this obsession to capture the whole history. So we went back from the very first CinemaScope lens, like people talk about scope, right? But it comes from, there used to be a CinemaScope lens, the Todd AO, amazing lenses, like actually Dan Keynes from Atlas Lens Company, he's a big collector, so he gave me access to some of his treasure collection. So we're capturing some very rare old anamorphics and spherical lenses, because I feel like some are out of reach, like they're almost like museum pieces now, but it's interesting, I feel like, to be inspired to, how did they actually look like? And is this something also maybe for lens manufacturers to be inspired, or you go to your rental house and can we tune something this way, or even find some old lens and use it for real. So we're working backwards and slowly catching up to the latest ones. So we some of the latest ones we don't have yet in the library, but we're trying to catch up.
Markus, what is your dream anamorphic lens? Something that hasn't been made yet.
Something that hasn't been made. Like I said earlier, like I really get fatigued from lenses. So whatever is the dream lens, maybe today might not be that tomorrow. But of course, I wish there was a small, compact front anamorphic zoom, like 2x squeeze with character, whatever that means, with lens metadata. That's my biggest concerned. Like if you look at all the interesting, I feel like lenses that have certain characters, usually like vintage lenses, old glass, either rehoused or like look at Panavision, they don't have lens data. So on bigger projects for visual effects, it's a big deal. Or for me too, I would like to, sometimes I don't operate a camera myself, and we have operators to see for sure on the monitor. Right now we have the 50 millimeter at wide open. It's something that's so obvious, like every consumer camera has that information displayed, right? Because the lens talks to the thing, but in the high-end cinema market, that's not a given. Like through the systems, you can calibrate your focus, like an Arri handset, for example, and then it will show you, but that's not the reality. Unfortunately, isn't like that. So there's always people walking around with pencil and paper next to the camera and taking notes, like for visual effects, for example. For this shot, we use that lens at a T4, and then sometimes you have to pick up like a couple of weeks later, right? You have to do a pickup shot and you try to find that information if it wasn't on the slate, or sometimes it's mislabeled on the slate. And like a consumer camera obviously has it all saved, and can't we have this in high-end lenses? Like that's my biggest request.
That actually reminds me of something I wanted to ask you earlier. I feel like a lot of processes on sets, well, we have now really modern cameras with extremely high resolution sensors and all the bells and whistles we want. But a lot of processes on especially big sets are very traditional, right? I mean, they've been like this for 100 years. And do you feel like sometimes it's too archaic in a way those things operate? Because, of course, there's a lot of things that influence that, which might be down to, union regulations and stuff like that might sometimes, unfortunately, hinder some innovation in actually workflows. Because if we look at tools like camera to cloud, which is now becoming more mainstream finally, but it's crazy that we're only talking about this now, where the cameras have come such a long way over the last 10 years, but I feel like all the other stuff kind of is still the same. How is it? What's your feeling about this?
I mean, there's for some processes, there's good reasons, right? Like reliability is so important. Like when you're on a big film set, like when you're like a small band shooter, you shoot for yourself, and I sometimes go myself out to shoot a test or something. You can take the time to fiddle with something. Or like, for example, I'm so fascinated with this new, like I played with this new LiDAR autofocus motor at PD Movie, and I think this is unbelievable. You don't have an MDR, everything is built in, you don't have a power cable, the battery is in there, and it has this LiDAR autofocus. Unbelievable. But I understand you cannot use this thing right now on a big film set, right, with what I talked about, interference, or like when you have 200 people waiting and you have an actor that has to maybe leave at a certain time, you have to nail that shot. That you cannot take any chances sometimes with new technology. That's why maybe you can be more risky and try out new stuff in a smaller scale. But I feel too, like in other ways, like there's so slow adaptation sometimes. Like looking at, like, speaking of lenses and focus, like if you look in the US, most ACs use Preston, which is amazing. They're reliable, strong motors. The signal, it always works. I have to say, it always works. But there is a box, like an MDR box on a camera that's half the size of a camera. The cameras became so small today, these days. Like, why is there a box that massive when you see other companies figuring out to integrating the control system in the motor? And why is there still a motor? Can't we integrate it into the lens? Like, still lenses do this for years. And yes, they say Cine lenses are too heavy and to build it, but they are also heavy because they are made for manual focus and focus gear and focus rings. I think if you would plan for this to be integrated, you would be able to build it lighter, and then an internal motor would be able to deal with it. And I feel like before the industry in the high-end market catches up, we're literally going to be replaced by AI. I feel like the gap, it's mind-boggling, right? So we're talking about some basic innovations for years, and why is it not coming? And Panavision did this years ago. They had the Primo, I think the large format Primo Artist. They have internal motors. You plug it on a DXL, for example. The camera recognizes it. Every time you swap a lens, it's auto-calibrated basically. But people are not really jumping onto this, and I think it didn't take off. Other companies were, I think, closely watching, is this something we should do too? And they're not doing it. But it's some innovation, interesting, very slow.
Well, I guess sometimes companies and also production companies need to be forced into innovation by competition. And whether the competition is other companies or AI, it remains to be seen, right? There was, I don't remember who said it at the Oscars, why don't you make 10 movies for 10 million each instead of one movie for 100 million? Because you have a 10 times higher chance of actually, having a successful movie at the cinema. Maybe this is where things are going, like I'm sure there are some smart ways of shrinking wasteful, just the wastefulness of our industry, right? In terms of where things are going. I think when we talk about also virtual sets, virtual production actually is making a lot of things easier, right? I mean, like you don't have to go on location for everything. You can shoot some stuff which is still expensive right now, of course, but that's also going to be more reachable, I think.
I'm really excited about, let's say, AI technology in this field, because I think the working in a volume is an amazing technology and liberating for, like, if you like to work in this environment, like, it can be very sterile, but if you embrace it, it's amazing, right, for a cinematographer to be able to shooting in dusk all day or having the sun, placing it exactly where you want. But what's usually prohibitive is the cost of creating that asset, the lead time it takes to build something, maybe for some commercials. So maybe you find an existing asset you can buy from a library, but for a feature film or a TV series to build that stuff, that takes forever. And sometimes it's just not possible. But I totally believing in optically capturing something, and that audiences, knowing that AI is out there, will embrace more and more the handcrafted and seeing a real human being, real emotion. But if there's a way, and I know companies are working on this, with AI prompting to generate a landscape as a base in Unreal, and then you maybe fine tweak it for a couple of minutes before you roll on it and say, like, I want the sun here, I want to remove a couple of trees. But if you prompt in, I want a forest, jungle, and there it is, and then you put it on your wall, and then you can shoot. I think it would really bring the cost down, and like we talked about, what we mentioned, efficiency, like making the process more efficient, but while still being creative and handcrafted in a way.
I mean, you're really, like, one of your focuses is shooting science fiction movies, right? And I guess it's something you really enjoy too. Have you had a lot of shoots on the volume already with your past productions?
Yeah, I think I did a series called Night Flyers. It was on Netflix and Sci-Fi, where we used very early on 2017. We used for the first time game engine on a big wall. It was not a curved volume; it was a big spaceship cockpit. And ever since, that's when I got fascinated by the technology. I used on every project. I used some form of video wall or virtual production, not necessarily the big volume, because the volume is very expensive and leads to that has also its challenging challenges. Sometimes you play in the sandbox and you're trapped in what you can do, right? I always believe in mixing relocations and using a wall. Like, you don't need always a big volume. You need what I call a massive TV, so to say. Like, it's a big wall. You put it outside of windows, or you stage your set in front of it. Yes, on every project since, I used it in some form and capacity, sometimes for driving shots, sometimes for like difficult locations. Like on Constellation, for example, there's this whole opening sequence in episode 1 is in a story, it's in Sweden, and we shot we wanted this blue hour feel. It has to be dark enough that you see the northern lights, and we knew we couldn't build shooting days like just shooting in this dusk light, and there's very long pitch black nights up there. It's so far north, so when the light is gone, it's really dark. You don't see it would be impossible to light a big forest or a frozen lake, or it would look artificial. So we captured some 360 plates, and for all the driving shots, for example, we used the volume which we then shot in Berlin.
Amazing. So that is actually a potential use of AI in the future that might make our lives easier without replacing us, hopefully.
Hopefully.
Good. Markus, anything else that you would like to highlight? I think we covered quite a lot. The intention was to talk only about anamorphic lenses, but I'm happy that we talked about more. It's always fascinating to talk about this kind of stuff.
I think it's still like the lens, it's fascinating, right? In recent years, I remember a couple of years back, the choices we had, what lens to shoot, or even I talked to some older generation cinematographers who did amazing work, but in their day and age, they either they shot Arri or Panavision, and there was maybe they had a super speed to choose from, or maybe an ultra prime or primo Panavision. Today, I'm really inspired by the vast choices we have, and that there's new. Always, you feel like, there must be everything on the market now. But then you see a new company coming out and building a really small anamorphic lens, or whatever it is, or a zoom in a range that was impossible. So I think this is. I'm really. Some people are maybe frustrated by it, and it gets hard you're getting lost maybe in the options. How do you choose? But I feel it's an amazing time to be a filmmaker, that there's so many tools available at any price point. And like I said, even if you do something, a big thing doesn't mean you need to have the most expensive lens. Be creative with it and discover and shoot something for real. And I think adding to this, with AI out there, I think people want to know and feel that this was captured for real. That's why I think a sterile, high-performing, clean lens, like a lens that's technically invisible, right? Lens designers, when they create the perfect lens, they basically create a lens that's invisible to the audience, right? You don't see anything besides the subject, but a lens that has some sort of character, like an anamorphic distortion. I think it's more and more important in this day and age that the audience feels that it was captured for real, even if AI obviously knows how to replicate some of these artifacts too. And that's what they're using, obviously, to make it feel real again. But I feel that's the interesting, what I'm really fascinated about. And that's how this CineD project came about. Testing and comparing lenses and just be inspired and be creative. You can be, maybe people are pessimistic about AI coming, and just be creative and shoot your stories, and people will find it, hopefully.
I think that's what I will take from our talk. The thing is that just do a blind test. I mean, that's the obvious. Ignore the price. If you just put those lenses of course, within your budget, and forget the brand name, forget how much they cost. See how they look on your camera. See if this is the look you like, and then just go out and shoot.
Yeah, and you can also rent. I mean, you don't have to buy.
Sure.
But one thing I wanted to mention that is actually interesting, because you said those lenses have character, they have a look, and we need that, of course, because now sensors are so clean that they just deliver the perfect image. But do you also feel like it puts more control back in your hands as a DP? Because you might be less affected than others from this, but in our industry, it's very often the problem that, the DP kind of can lose control after the shoot. I mean, I'm sure you're fully involved in all the grading until the end, but the reality for a lot of us is that you hand over the footage and it's there's really... You might have you might be there in the grading for some bit, but there is always, of course, a chance of the producer, director, editor screwing up your shots or cropping in without you noticing and stuff like that. And if you shoot on anamorphic lenses, you already bake in a look that is, like it's very defined, and that can feel like you are more in control than when you deliver an image that's completely clean, shot in log, of course, like everything, but then, they can do whatever they want with it in post.
Yeah, that's an important point. And I think it's not like an ego thing to say we as a filmmaker want to bake in our look because we think that looks great. It's like producers hire us for a reason. They want a certain aesthetic or our expertise and taste. And if you deliver something clean, so to say, hoping that it will magically be applied in post, and we're not involved, for example, it's not magically going to happen. So it's in their best interest that we craft it as close to the final result as possible. And like the right lens choice is so crucial. People sometimes think, we can add distortion and we can add a fake flare. It's like we all know this is not the real thing, and an audience will feel maybe you get away with it for a couple of shots, but in a film or in a couple of sequences, you will feel the interaction of light and the lens, and if this was done for real. And I think we respond to it like differently, and every artifice is just something that puts more distance, I think, between the story and the audience.
Yeah,
I don't want to add a can of worms, but I think also talking about the future, and what I think I want to see in the future is obviously a virtual lens. Like, let's say, why can't we have a not too crazy, like spherical or anamorphic base lens with lens metadata, but we create our own, let's say, a look file. Johnny can create, I have my signature anamorphic lens for this project. I tweaked it on a computer, right? Like in a computer system, that's the amount of distortion, that's the amount of chromatic aberration you want, that's the kind of detail sharpness, but it's a metadata look file. I think this has to come, but it can only happen. That's, again, might be interesting with Nikon and Red, for example. You need a company that makes cameras and lenses because they have to talk to each other, let's say, and you need a very powerful camera that can in real time preview that look, right? Because it's very important that when you shoot something on set, that the director and producers, everybody sees what we're getting, so there's no surprise in post, suddenly it looks differently. And this opens up whole possibilities for visual effects to work on, let's say, clean, easy to work with footage, right? And you can tweak, like you do color timing, you can fine tweak your lens characteristics. I'm waiting for years for something like this to happen, but
who knows? Maybe one day you have the coating in your pocket and you just come with different coating and just put it on the lens. No, I'm just joking.
But that reminds me actually of the textures that are introduced with the Alexa 35, which is essentially something in that direction, no? It's not really a picture profile, but it gives you different kind of grain and stuff on your digital footage as metadata.
At first it was like it's a baked-in thing, but I think now there's also textures, as far as I heard, if I'm mistaken,
yeah, maybe.
which are metadata, which are non-destructive. But I think the non-destructive way is interesting. Again, there's the risk where we talked about maybe some producer, somebody in post disregards it and throws it out of the window, but that's another problem to deal with. But just the opportunity to, right, every DP is fascinated, to tune their own lenses. And like when you look at the high-end projects, they all want to detune or tune. But there's only so much you can do with a physical lens. And it also, I think for rental houses, quite a logistical nightmare you're getting these lenses back and they have to go out on another project the next day. And how do you untune them and not mix it up? But if you can, let's say you have a certain high quality lens that has a little bit of a look, but you can add virtual parameters to it. I think that's very exciting to play with what else can be done with it.
To the subject, to round this off, the problem that we have that in post-production the shots might be modified not in a way that the DP intended. It's also something that directors sometimes face. As you think about all those movies, even big famous movies from history where we have a director's cut, and sometimes we even have directors that are completely, they don't want anything to do with their film because they don't think that it's their film anymore because the producer cut it down. Very often it's a length issue, right? But that's also something, it affects the best of the best. So, yeah. Good. Thank you, Markus. Let's round this off here. Let's end it here. We're actually going to talk to you again very soon at NAB, where we'll do an update interview about Cineflares Pro, the Pro version that you're going to be launching around NAB, and we'll dive into that there. So for the people who watch this video or listen to this episode, be on the lookout for that show coverage video from NAB. And thank you, Markus, for staying up until 2 a.m. in LA for us?
Nap time now, yeah.
Thank you, Markus. Yeah, always a pleasure talking to you.
Having me. It was fun. Always fun to talk about lenses.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for listening. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you on the next episode of CineD Focus Check.
Thank you, guys.